Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to speak to the proposed amendment to the Emergency and Disaster Management Act, and particularly the creation of a new provincial organization, the BC Volunteer Corps. So, first off, I'd like to start off on common ground. All of us in this House, no matter where we sit, recognize the extraordinary role that volunteers play in British Columbia. Whether it's during wildfire season, public health emergencies, floods, or even just the day-to-day work of looking after one's neighbors, volunteers have always stepped up. They've done so without expectation of recognition, reward, or regulation. So I understand that the instinct is to harness that power and to formalize it, to make it easier to call upon people in times of need. And that's what I see the intention is behind this amendment. And I believe it's rooted in good faith. But, Madam Speaker, good intentions are not enough. Legislation is about outcomes. And the question before us is not whether or not volunteering is good. The question is, how do we as a province support that work without undermining it? And that starts with a critical question: are we duplicating work that's already being done? Across British Columbia, we have an ecosystem of community responders, local ESS programs, Indigenous-led response teams, faith-based networks, and nonprofits that have built trusted relationships over decades. These people know their neighbors, they know the terrain, they understand the context, and when crisis hits, they don't wait for a directive from Victoria. They act and they mobilize. This amendment proposes creating a new centralized provincial body. That likely means a new digital platform, an administrative structure, paid staff, training modules, eligibility systems, reporting requirements, and so on. Mr. Speaker, we know what that means in government terms: more layers, more costs, and more bureaucracy. So we must ask, are we solving a problem or are we creating one? Because when you start duplicating efforts, two things happen. One, you spend money that could directly go to the front line. And two, you risk eroding the trust and initiatives that community-based organizations have spent years, and in some cases, Madam Speaker, have spent generations building. And that brings me to a point that I think that should give the members opposite a real pause. Is this not the kind of centralized overreach that many Conservatives have historically cautioned against? As Margaret Thatcher once said, the state has no source of money other than the money people earn themselves. There is no such thing as public money, there is only taxpayer money. And I would ask, would this proposal utilize taxpayer dollars in the best way? Are we building something new because it's necessary, or simply because it will look good on a press release? I say this not to be partisan, but to raise a real philosophical question. When government steps in with a top-down model, it is often unintentionally sidelines the very people it's trying to help. And for a party that has long talked about limiting government, empowering civil society, and respecting local autonomy, this proposal ought to raise some flags. Let me put it this way. If a nonprofit group in rural British Columbia is already doing the work, are we here to support them or are we here to supplant them? I can tell you as an MLA that has rural components to my riding, I will always stand up for my rural riding, the areas of my rural riding, and making sure that I can do everything in my power to support them. Because centralizing volunteer coordination may sound efficient in theory, but in practice it shifts resources from where they're needed most, especially in small towns and Indigenous communities, and in rural and remote regions. These are the places where infrastructure already exists, where trust is strong but capacity is stretched, and where adding more reporting and oversight won't necessarily help those communities, but perhaps it may actually hinder our ability to help. So let's talk about volunteers. I've been a long-time volunteer myself, whether as being the president of Literacy Central Vancouver Island, working alongside the Nanaimo Lady Smith Schools Foundation and many other organizations. British Columbians are generous with their time, but they're also fiercely independent. They value their privacy, and they volunteer because they want to, not because they're on a list. This new body would likely require a centralized database of volunteers, perhaps linked to training, certification, and even eligibility checks. And that further raises some very real questions. Who owns that data? How will it be protected? Will people be able to opt out of the consequence, opt out without consequence? And how long until this volunteer registry becomes a tool not of support, but of scrutiny? These are not abstract concerns. They go to the heart of what makes volunteering work, and that is trust. The trust of our local communities, the trust of the people in their communities, knowing exactly how to deal with challenges that face them. Madam Speaker, let me be clear. There may be a place for better coordination, but it must be done with the people who are already doing that work. That means sitting down with Indigenous leaders, sitting down with faith groups, municipalities, and rural associations, listening to them and partnering with them, not creating a parallel structure that assumes that government knows better. Because as I've mentioned already, I will stand up with our partners in our local communities every single day because they know exactly what they need in their communities. If this legislation does move forward, and today I'm not here to say whether or not it should or shouldn't, but rather that it receives the scrutiny that it deserves, which is our job as legislators. And if so, government has the responsibility to be transparent about 4 things: the cost of establishing and maintaining the BC Volunteer Corps, the governance structure, who will oversee it, will it be a volunteer structure? That we also talk about the integration with existing groups and how they will be funded and not forgotten, and privacy protocols. How will this data be stored? Who will access it? And what are the rights of those volunteers? To paraphrase Stone Cold Steve Austin from WWE, what's the bottom line here? Will this actually help us respond faster when disaster strikes, or will it just look good on paper? Will it make it easier to volunteer, or will it make it more complicated? Will it bring resources to the margins, or consolidate them in Victoria? Madam Speaker, this House should be careful not to confuse action with impact, because sometimes in our rush to create something new, we overlook the quiet, resilient, and effective systems that are already in place. The people of British Columbia do not need us to reinvent the wheel. They need us to listen. They need us to invest in what works and to resist the urge to centralize what is at its heart, a deeply local impulse, the will to help. This amendment deserves our full attention, not because we doubt the value of volunteers. I very much am supportive of all British Columbians and the work they do, but we should honor them and honor the work that they're doing in their local communities. Because if we're serious about strengthening emergency response, then we must strengthen the people and organizations who are already holding the line. Let's not replace the grassroots with red tape. Let's not confuse bureaucracy with bravery. And let us not, in trying to help our communities, Let's make sure that we help them and not harm them. Thank you, Madam Speaker.